Hello, I'm Giuseppe, a technical artist, and I'm gonna now showcase Suwan, a procedural toolset that I built at Twin Drums to aid us in the production of islands or levels for our game. What you see here is the 2D representation of the island we're gonna generate, and this was semi-procedurally generated by Suwan itself. You can generate some sort of initial shapes and then you can modify them by hand in this 2D preview. I'm gonna quickly show you how you can do that. For example, I can place a lake that's 2-cell radius. I can place it here, for example, right? And it will show up. I'm gonna undo that because this tool has fully undo redo capabilities. So I'm gonna go now from this 2D representation to a terrain inside this Unity scene. So I would go to the terrain panel and I have this button here to generate terrain. What you see here, it's a different representation of the same 2D map. This has some curl noise applied so that the shape looks more organic when we generate the terrain. So someone asks me if I want to do it, I'll just go ahead and click yes. This is a destructive operation, so that's why I'm getting a prompt to confirm. So now we have a landscape that's been generated. This is made of separate terrain tiles. There's a small issue. When you generate them out of the box, you can see some holes in between the different tiles. But the tool provides a stitch options that will stitch the terrain right away. After the terrain has been generated, you can paint it. So there's some hard-coded rules that will generate the right terrain layer or terrain material based on terrain height. So you can see there's some underwater sand, then cliffs, and on all the flat surfaces we have this mix of green and brown terrain. Now that we have the terrain painted, we can generate the water. So as I said, these are islands and they are surrounded by water. Water generation is also destructive, so I'm gonna get a prompt. Now you can see that we have water all around the island. So if I can zoom in a bit more here, you can see where the water meets the land. We have the wet sand. Okay, the last missing bit for the terrain is to scatter some grass. You can decide how many different prefabs to scatter and their scale range. So for now on this island we only have one. So if I scatter, you can see grass appearing here. So you can see it swaying in the wind. All right, after this, we wanna generate some ramps so that players can move through different levels of elevations. So if I go to the ramp tab, you can see some gizmos showing me some points, and these are basically telling the level designer that a ramp is gonna be placed from this point down to this point. And in the 2D version of the tool, you can see these white markings here. These are also modifiable by hand. So what we do now, we produce ramps. This is also both a visual aid for the level designer to see where actually ramps will be placed, but it's also used for this second step where we do produce cliffs. Once we click here, Suwan will place lots of these small cubes, which are nav mesh modifiers. They're basically telling the nav mesh that we're gonna see in a second to make all these cliff faces unwalkable. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I open here the surfaces, I already have show nav mesh. We don't have a nav mesh baked yet. So let me go to the nav mesh object in the scene and then I can simply bake it. Once I bake it, let me hide the gizmos. Oh, I won't see it. You can see that where the occluders are, there's no nav mesh. And where there are no occluders, you can see how a player could be able to walk up this ramp. All right, after ramps, what we can have a look at is what the level designer would do almost by hand. So let's open, there's some pre-made things like in cooking shows. So there's this paths folder, which contains a bunch of paths. If I enable them in the inspector, you can see them here. And these are, let me hide the nav mesh. these are some spline tools that a level designer has placed and that tell Suwan these are actually walkable paths, so Suwan is aware of them and can do something with them. I will enable some more things. So what our level designers also do is place points of interests and other spaces that they want to leave empty. For example, we use them to avoid Suwan from scattering vegetation on. So now that we have all of this, we can go back to the terrain panel and paint it again. And now that we've painted it, you can see that it has placed a different textures. Grass, it's still on it, but what you can do, you can come here, scatter grass again, and now grass will not be on top of paths, like it normally would happen. All right, now we move to the more gameplay side of things. If we go here to gatherables, we have a panel where, based on the subbiomes that make up this island, we can scatter the vegetations that user can interact with. So if I do scatter gatherables, you will see some game objects appearing. These are special game objects that need to be on the island and then tell the player, okay, this is something you can gather. Alongside gatherables, we can also scatter NPC encounters. So you can see these big gizmos, and this is what a server knows as a position where they can scatter an NPC. After we've done this, we can go and scatter the rest of the vegetation. In here are the subbiomes that I was talking about before. This island is split into simply two subbiomes. A default subbiome, you can see this green bit, which is the default subbiome for rainforest, which is what's the subbiome of this island. And the green bits are these beaches. So if I click on draw default subbiome, right, you can see these are all the points that where Suwan would place vegetation. So there were already some of them, but I can also change the seed here and scatter them again. And once it's done, you can see their positions. I can do the same on the beaches. So now we have, these are all the points where vegetation is. Moreover, we can also preview where all the vegetation will be. So let me hide the gizmos. Suwan will just place them. So as a level designer, right, you can see roughly what this would look like. And you have some tool or further configs, I should say, where you can change a bit the distribution of it. So now that we have this, of course, if I enable the nav mesh again, you can see we would be able to walk through things. So I need to bake it one more time. So I go to the nav mesh, I bake it, and now you can see some holes appearing in the nav mesh, so we cannot walk through it. Another cool feature that Suwan comes with is the ability to bake all of these assets. One thing we figured out while developing the game was that islands as in Unity scenes were becoming way too big. So what we developed is a simple tool which will take whatever was scattered as vegetation and will bake them into play mode. What this means is, if we look, for example, at this terrain tile, you can see that this comes with a bunch of these are the prefab names and how many of them there are, but this is just an aid to visualize them. But what this means is that they are all stored as packed transforms. So these are also 16-bit integers that at runtime get unpacked into fold, position, rotation, and scale. So we're finally at the end of this showcase, and what I want to show you is what the island looks like when we go into play mode. All right, let me maximize this window, and if I walk through it, you can see this is one of the paths that was automatically painted by the tool. You can see grass, you can see some assets here. And if I go back, if I minimize this, if I go back into the scene view, you can see all the vegetation assets appearing. So they are rendered at runtime, but they're not part of the scene itself. This concludes a really quick overview of Suwan. Bye.